Um, uh, it's about 10 o'clock now. I'm going to reintroduce myself. We're going to go back to this question that I started with that it's Al, right? Started to talk about. And I want to get to know each of you. This is kind of more of a discussion than just a presentation. And I will present briefly about what I did and get some of your thoughts about it, but maybe not at the beginning. At the beginning, I want to get to know each other more, and then later, I'll share what I did, and then I want you to consider how students can drive or lead the instruction in your class, and in what ways they could do this. I truly believe that I teach at a community college. Community college university students are knowledgeable. They have a lot of motivation. They might know more than we think they do. They can do more than we think they can do. And the more empowerment we give them, the better it is. I think this improves equity because it gives all students a voice and a chance to share who they are. It improves success because then they're really more motivated and they take ownership of their learning. Um, Once again, my name is Michael Climo. I teach ESL at Los Angeles Mission College for all those who are really starting now. What happened was in the beginning of fall 2021, I started my class with an introduction, and my students said some things I didn't expect them to. I got to know them more, and I let them take leadership for part of the class, and they did a great job. I teach as an ESL teacher, our focus is on grammar, writing essays, reading is part of it. And so that's kind of my focus, but I think this can work with everyone. I'd like each person to introduce yourself briefly to the group here and to discuss how you have led instruction when you took courses in the past. A lot of us don't realize that one way we know how to teach is because of the experiences we had when we were younger. Personally, I went through what's called the Hutchins School of Interdisciplinary Liberal Studies at Sonoma State University. I was impressed because we had a very wide learning and ability, and our teachers gave us a lot of chances to do presentations and lead part of the classes. All of our classes were seminar style learning where we were in a table discussing topics, and our teachers weren't really lecturers. They weren't really like taking a lead in a traditional way. And it made me see learning in a different way. I didn't learn like that in high school and junior high school, but I did in university. And I've always seen learning as something that people have to take ownership for. I think when we really want to learn something, when people take more of an ownership for learning, they're going to do better. So I'd like those who'd like to share right now to introduce yourself briefly and to say, at least share a time, not it was when you were a teacher, but you were a student and you actually led the learning. So here's what's happened in some of our classes. We would have discussions and our teacher would say to us, you're in charge of the discussion today. And so we read this book and I've got to lead the discussion on it. And of course, it's an intellectual discussion. And as I lead it, the teacher's kind of guiding me and helping me in how to lead. And that really helped me in life. I never thought I'd be a teacher, but it helped me know how to lead something. And that was my personal experience. Who else would like to introduce yourself? I'd like each of you to introduce yourself and to share a time when you were the leader as a student. Who would like to go first? Any volunteer? Is that Susan Altman? Go ahead, Susan.
Okay, hi, I'm Susan Altman. I teach at Middlesex College in New Jersey, which is also a community college, and I teach in the visual arts department. It became really clear to me how important it is for students to teach each other when I'm on sabbatical this semester,
Mhm.
and when I was on sabbatical last time, I took courses in digital art, which I knew nothing about. Wasn't part of my training as a student or a faculty member. And at the end, the professor left at the end of the day. It was I'm using a winter session course example, and the students all came to me because they found out that I was a professor, and I didn't really know anything. I said I could talk about aesthetics, but I can't talk about how to do this. But actually, in those conversations outside of class time when we were in the studio, I actually learned by teaching them and realized how important that was for students to do that. It just reminded me, and I had been teaching a long time at that point. Um, but it really reminded me how important that is. That when you teach someone else, you actually learn it.
That's
And
right.
and it's something that I try and do with my students is to have them really collaborate together because that collaboration helps them to clarify it in their mind. So that was an experience I can't think back to an experience as an
No
undergrad or
problem.
grad
No
student, but
problem. Thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate that. Anybody else want to share? Well, Leska.
So I introduced myself a little bit earlier, but I'll do it again. My name is Waleska Salgado. I'm currently at Marywood University, and I teach some courses in clinical mental health counseling. So some of the experiences that I had in my learning that I could see definitely transfer to how it is that I am teaching now and working with my students is that I had the opportunity to really have a lot of group discussions with my peers. And something that my professors did with me was that they place a lot of value on my personal experiences, right? They
Great.
reinforced the fact that I was the content expert in my life, right? And they leaned and they taught me to lean into those experiences and to pull from everyday life when navigating and learning in the classroom. I think this was specific, like especially important as a first-time generation student in going through college, and like it reinforced a lot of the other skills that I had, even though this was like a new thing I was navigating, that made me feel more confident in the space that I was in. And that's definitely something that I see myself doing with the students that I have now, placing a lot of value and honoring like their experiences. Because I do teach counseling, this is also a skill that's important for them to learn as counselors as they go out into the field to honors other people's experiences, right? And make sure that they're like the expert. So I thought it was really interesting that you started the conversation with a reflection piece, which is something I do too, like reflect on experiences that you had. So that reflection piece, right, really allowed me to put that together. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, our personal experiences are very valuable. And sometimes people aren't allowed to build on that and to use that. That's a very interesting perspective you gave. And you were studying counseling, psychology. What were you studying? Oh, we can't
Yes,
hear you.
counseling.
Great. Thank you so much. Anybody
Uh,
else want to share about yourself a little bit and how you learned in a situation where students were driving instruction, when you were driving the instruction when someone else was teaching? Uh,
I can speak
Robert,
to this. I can
go
speak
for
to
it.
this a bit. Clearly, there's a bit of a generational divide.
Hmm.
It's been a steep learning curve for me and others of my generation, perhaps,
Hmm.
to understand how students learn. But I think ennobling the student and letting them lead the instruction with guidance from me has been valuable. So
Wow.
allowing the students to express their culture, their cultural background is key to validating their position in the class. So although my teaching, which is professional baking and pastry, includes the classics, which of course can be redefined or need to be redefined on almost a daily basis. I don't want to seem to be a person who is ignoring other than Western European beginnings of this field, because it isn't only Western European in origin. So when I have students from South America, Latin America, Asia, wherever, we want to honor the achievements in that field of people who come from or descend from those areas of the world. So, it shouldn't be a one-sided or, a very skewed approach. We do not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, though. That there is a lot to learn from those traditions that I've mentioned that I was schooled in. But I do think we need to expand our definition of what the field can include. So, validating students' backgrounds, engage them more in the class, and that means they also will be more able to show off their cultural prowess, their cultural backgrounds, which I think is so important. So that's my 2 cents on that in terms of student-driven learning. Granted, there are students who will not wish to do this, right? In other words, there are students who are reticent, not as forthright. So it's those you've got to pull out and validate, those that are ready to speak. Well, you already have their, their attention and their voice being heard. So I would love to hear what other teachers and other colleagues say about all this. Yeah.
Would somebody else like to share something right now? Anybody else? How are you guys feeling about this? Or do you want me to move on and share more about what I did?
Yes.
Let me share what I did a little bit with you guys. And so just like we're introducing ourselves right now, I started my ESL class in fall 2021 with a couple questions, and I prepared a PowerPoint, so I'd like to kind of share it with you. Even though I don't always like PowerPoints, I thought might be a nice way to discuss, show a little bit of what I did, and then I want to show some of the readings and the things that my students actually did, because they were very impressive to me. So when we think about a class, I don't know if you ever get a chance to have one, but I had what I could say an amazing class. And if we think about how students can lead instruction, I'm going to share this. And you might want to consider what you teach. So when we go with our students leading, I think the biggest question is this: where do we want students to go? I make my objectives and the plan of the class very clear. What do I want students to do? I want my students to focus on thinking and learning. I'd like them to do some leading and sharing and discussing and reflecting throughout the class, even though they're focusing a lot on writing and grammar. Grammar is used in so many ways, and as an advanced class, there are so many different issues I could look at, but it's good to see what my students are doing. So what did I do? Enjoyable readings. What kinds of topics and ideas do adults like to read about? I want you guys to think about this. I mean, I was kind of surprised because I asked my students when they introduced themselves to answer a few questions. The first one was, how many essays did you write for fun this summer? Remember, this is the beginning of the fall semester. I'm teaching students how to write an essay. And I wonder, does anybody write an essay in English, in your language? I mean, by the way, do you guys like to write an essay? How many people don't like to write essays? It's kind of a funny question. How many people just write essays for fun? And then I asked them to name at least 3 powerful books you have read and why you like them. Now, by the way, nobody wrote an essay for fun during the summer. It's normal. I don't know about essay writing, whether it's that useful outside of school, but I try to encourage my students to think about essay writing as a way to express our opinions, our thoughts, our ideas about something, and that sometimes it's good to just write and share our thoughts. But what really surprised me is when they mentioned 3 powerful books you have read and why you like them. My students brought up some very interesting books. After they did that, and I thought about those books, and I talked with them, I started to think, what could I do with these books? Because the books that they mentioned, actually, the reading level was high. They were interesting books. And I found free books for all. I found free PDFs online along with my students, and they could read them. And so they became some of the major topics for the class. And the students who chose books led the class. They led By choosing which chapters they wanted us to read, they created presentations along with conversation questions for the entire class to cover. And they were the teacher for an hour, hour and a half, sometimes longer, where they were talking about their topic, and other students were actively involved. It wasn't just they weren't just reading the book. Everybody read that one or two chapters before class, and so it was more of a discussion of what it was. Letting them lead and giving them a chance to lead the discussions, to present, to show who they are, was really awesome. They came up with things that were amazing to me. One of the things is they chose some books that maybe I wouldn't normally choose, okay? And I'll give you one book that they chose. And let's see if I can find it in here or where I have it listed. Forgive me. Most of the books they chose were self-help books. And they really liked self-help books. So they read, let me see if I can find it the right way in here. I got it open somewhere, but I'm using my laptop because I'm visiting my sister. You know what? I'll just go with this part because this actually has the writings and what the students read. One of the first books that we went over was Carnegie's book. I think you guys know this book, How to Win People and how to win people, you understand, and influence people. And the students did a great job with this. The student who chose it's a business major. He's very intelligent. He had read this book before, How to Win Friends and Influence People. You guys know this book? Anybody? Classic book, great book to read. This guy is so good that I suggested that he even work for this organization, Dale Carnegie. I mean, his presentation was awesome. He worked with me, gave 15 discussion questions. The students discussed these for more than an hour. They really liked his presentation that he had, and he did a great job. Other students chose other books, and but this kind of book is interesting for me because the reading level is not so easy. The vocabulary that was in there is not that easy, but he did a great job with it. The students comprehended it. I don't know how many people know about Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements. Has anybody ever read that book? Four Agreements. Excellent book. It's another kind of a book that guides you in what you should do in life. So a different student read this one, and Teresa led us on this. She chose this book, a great book to read, and very interesting things for us to learn as a class. And then students went through other books, The Old Man and the Sea. One person chose a literature book, and biographies. What kind of biographies did they like? Well, they liked different types of biographies. I was kind of surprised at what they chose, but they liked biographies. They kind of liked direction books, books that guide us on what we should do in our life. And then they led the class and did a fantastic job. They met with me before we did it, just like you were saying, Robert. If the students were going to lead, I think us as teachers want to kind of model, help them. A lot of my students as ESL students, they needed a little help with the grammar, how to make the questions, how to present themselves. They needed a little help, and I helped them individually. That was one part. The other part was, is that a good way to ask the question? Could we ask it in a different way? And they were not simple factual questions. It was more of a thinking question, like, what do you think about the concept and idea, which is more of what I'm focusing on in an English type of class, where we're focusing on concepts and ideas, and I'm not teaching a specific trade or skill. What do you guys think about this? Do you think that was a good idea? And how do you think you could do some student-led instruction in your class are really my big hopes for this short presentation. First off, any reflections on what I did? I mean, I'll be honest with you. Here's my thoughts about it after I've gotten done with it. It was great to have my students lead for part of the class, but then another part of the class I was leading, and the students sure were more engaged and liked the student-led instruction more. So the big reflection for me is, how can I do this more? How can I have students lead in the instruction more? Not everybody's introduced themselves. Really, it depends a lot on what we're teaching and what the objectives are of our class. And how are you going to meet those objectives? Because I think, any kind of student-led instruction needs to be done within the framework of the class. Not every class is on writing or on reading. And what is the goal? What's our target? And how can we get students to take that ownership into leading other students towards that topic? Anybody have a concept on what I did or some thoughts about this?
Well, I think that it's very productive to establish first, or number one, the communication, the connection between you and the student. I think that brings the connection down to a personal level, which brings it closer. So having proposed that platform, then you can take off from there with all the stuff that you're talking about. Absolutely, having the student mention what he or she is looking forward to, and sometimes I just ask him, what is it that you would like to learn in this class, even though it may or may not be related. This is towards the beginning of the course. It's a free, open discussion type of few minutes. But within that, you get to know where they're coming from and how they perceive things and things of such nature, which allows for further knowing about where they're coming from. I think it's very important to establish that, and it brings in a level of trust between not only you and the students, but also within the class, a comfortable setting.
Okay, so I'm going to ask each person now to share what you teach, where you're from, because I still haven't heard from everybody. Those who came early, they introduced themselves. The second thing is, how do you think students can be leaders into going towards your objectives? Now, I want to be clear that what my students did, they presented on this topic, they wrote essays on this, they knew what the student learning outcomes were. They met the student learning outcomes of this class very well by guiding it. So it wasn't necessarily going into a different direction from the class. It was very focused on exactly what I wanted them to do. I made it clear from the beginning that this is the focus of the class. I want you to be working on this in your presentations. How can we use the concepts and ideas in the book that you're reading to write an essay? What could people write about? How does it get us thinking about things? Now, that's of course, that essay writing in an ESL class is not limited to a specific topic. So I have a very open and wide topics that I can present and have my students write about. So that gives me a lot more flexibility. So please introduce yourself. I'd like each person, maybe I'm going to pick on people that I haven't heard from. Bobby Cohen, can you introduce yourself? Tell us what you teach and how you think maybe some students could lead towards meeting the objectives in your class, and maybe how they've done that before, and if you think it really works.
Hello.
Hi.
I am not currently teaching right now, so I'm
Okay.
sorry I don't have any students with which I can relate this, but I'm an assessment specialist that work with a lot of professors, so I'm all ears.
Okay. Wow. So you're assessment specialist. Who do you work with, Bobby?
I work with 6 of the colleges across our university
Great.
to help them with their program evaluation and their program assessments.
Are teachers, where do you teach? And are teachers having more student-led instruction or student-led classes or parts of classes at all where you're at?
I'm at the University of Houston, and I really can't speak to that. I would
Okay.
like to think that that's happening, but after hearing your presentation, I'm going to have a lot more ammunition.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bobby. I appreciate it. Calling on somebody's not you at least. Denise, anything, would you like to share any thoughts you have?
Hi, I have low internet connection today, so I apologize that you don't get my real face.
No problem.
Denise Frempel, English philosophy faculty at Merced College. Something I've been leaning into heavily lately is kind of a morph. I started with a choose your own adventure assignment where I would design 3 different assignments with the same rubric, and then I would allow students to choose what kind of assignment they were more interested in completing, whether that be something like an essay or a curation or like a PowerPoint presentation of some sort. And then from there, I thought, well, why don't I just let students design their own assignments? So now what I do is I constantly foreground my courses SLOs. I have a student or students pick which SLO they'll be demonstrating mastery or accomplishment in, and then they write their own assignment. They have to justify how their assignment allows them to hit the SLO. And then they often even design their own rubric, which I get involved in if it's a little bit too easy. But I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from students that as we all know, teaching is one of the highest forms of demonstrating mastery. So it's kind of like they're teaching as they're doing. And I think it's really powerful to engage students in that manner.
That's an interesting idea. Students write their own assignments, but you have the student learning outcomes clear for them, and they might even modify or choose a little different way to make a rubric. That's wow, what a creative way to approach this. I really think we've got a lot of knowledge here. Excellent idea. Jennifer, Casey, can you share anything? Are you there? I'll come back to you, Jennifer. Brad Berger, any ideas? What do you teach? Anything that's happened with you that you've had student-led instruction, student-led classes at all?
I'm a math instructor, and it's sort of hard to do what you were talking about, where you have students come up with books they've read and things like that. If I ask my students what they want to learn in the semester, I'd basically throw the course outline out the window. And but Denise had said something that sort of stuck in my mind in terms of like student-driven instruction, and that is mastery can be shown if you can teach something. And I am hesitant, but I like the idea of letting students teach the rest of the class. And usually they're very fearful of that because they are not very confident in their abilities in the things we're talking about. But well, I'm here to listen and
I'll show. I mean, the way I would think about math with my class, and I didn't mention this, is with our grammar. So I give them an initial grammar assessment of all the major topics we're going to cover in this semester, and the students who are the lowest in that part, whatever part it is, let's say it's the use of conditionals. The students who are the lowest in conditionals, they make a group and they have to teach how to use conditionals later in the semester. So, I think that students we can have specific topics and still let students try to teach it. The question is it good for them to teach on their strengths or to teach on their weaknesses? I personally do with grammar. I have them try to teach on the things that are hardest for them to see if they can get that hard part to a point where they can explain it to the other students in class. And but I don't know if anybody else has a concept. I mean, we do have objectives in the class. We do have a plan, right? And so we need to stick with that. But at the same time, how can we let students lead in some ways? You know, that it is a question. I don't think it's that easy. Aaron, can you introduce yourself? Thank you, though. I appreciate that, Brad. Nice to meet you. Which college did you say you were at? Or
I'm
university?
sorry, I didn't say. I'm at Copper Mountain College out near Joshua Tree National Park.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Aaron?
Yes. Hey, I'm Erin Chaucy. I work at Fresno City College, so Central Valley. I teach English there. So one of the things that we have to do in our class is the students have to write an 8 to 12 research paper by the end of the semester. In that, I sort of begin by showing, and we do, you know, library tutorials of how to demonstrate research, or how we demonstrate how to do research in the library database. And then eventually, because we're all writing on the same topic or a similar topic, I have students do the research themselves, and then they have to present one of the articles that they found. And it kind of becomes like a sharing of if this article is something that piques your interest, if this article is, you know, going to share some kind of knowledge that you couldn't find when you were on the database, or you just had different lingo that you use to search for your resource. It allows them to share and collaborate, but also teach, because then they've had to read and understand and be able to explain what it's the purpose of that article is that they plan on using. And then therefore they're able to really translate that well into their support when they use that article in their essay.
Great. Good idea. Yeah, you know, the question becomes, how much can be student led? Should it be the majority of a class? Should it be part of a class? My students didn't lead the entire class, so we had a 3-hour class. They would lead half of it for one day. And then they had this grammar part that they'd present in another part. I try to have some student-led instruction at different parts. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes longer. This one was more interesting to me because they had more thought-provoking questions and ideas. It wasn't just this is what it says and kind of factual. It was more of getting people in a discussion with one another. Yeah. Which is not easy for ESL students. You understand, for my students, the hardest part might be when they go to a regular academic course and there's a discussion in the class. How do they participate in a discussion? That's not easy. It's really not. You understand? I'm going to just say that in a foreign language, it's really hard. I talk to students who transfer to UCLA, USC, major universities, keep in touch with them, and that's the hardest thing that they have. You know, I'm going to be honest with you, discussion is not easy. You understand? Okay, anybody else want to share a concept or idea that you have a little bit more to get to know each other? I know some people did earlier at this point, or do you want me to move on to the next part that I'm going to bring for you? Here's my next concept for you, or my next big question, which is, when we have student-driven instruction and students are leading instruction, how do we give good feedback to our students? I know some people who like to record what students do with a video, make a video recording, and then let students see themselves and reflect on their own participation and learning, kind of self-reflection. Another concept is that the instructor can meet with the student after the presentation, review what the student did, what they liked, what could be better. You know, kind of, it's like the metacognitive, or thinking about what you did. How can I improve what I do? We can say having students lead instruction or take a leadership role is good and beneficial, but I know some people get afraid of it. They're very nervous. Being in front of even a small class, or in leading a Zoom, even any kind of leadership like that can be difficult. Sometimes people get nervous. They're prepared. They want to talk about this and that, but then when it happens, they don't really do it. So there's kind of 3 major aspects to student-driven instruction. First is the planning and deciding what to do. meeting with the instructor, kind of giving some guidance or helping students meet with each other. But that planning, before it happens, there's the presentation or when the student is actually instructing. And then there should be what? Reflection, just like us as teachers, right? You know, we prepare, we teach, and then we reflect, right? I mean, I think it's not that, and I don't think it's complicated at all. But I did meet with most of my students after their presentations as well. And I wanted to get their reflections on what they thought about what they did. And that was very beneficial because some of them said, you know, well, I was hoping to do this and that, and they had some things prepared that they didn't do. But it was okay. You know, it was all right. Heck, how many of us have taught a class and you had something prepared and you didn't get to it? You understand? I mean, I think it happens, right? But I told some of them, you know, just preparing and getting that ready and thinking about it, you've made a lot of improvement. The other part was, how can I have my students be involved in more open-ended learning? You understand? Instead of like just fact-based, that it's just this fact and information, how can we have them be involved in more kind of, we could say, creative or thinking skills where they're really expressing some concepts and ideas that they have? I believe that's a very important aspect of what we do. So student-driven instruction, what are we really saying? Number one, students can take ownership of their learning. Number two, it benefits them because then they remember more, they learn more, it sticks with them. It's like, it really is learning in a lot of ways. And number three is it makes the class more interesting. I don't know what to say, guys. I mean, I like teacher presentations. Here I was volunteering to do a presentation, but my biggest fear was, am I just going to talk for 45 minutes? Is that our example of ideal instruction? That one person is talking and most people are just listening? I think that education needs to continue to move beyond that concept. That we need to remember that education is a discussion. Education is a place where students are entering in, they have knowledge, they have experience, and they should be able to take ownership. Does anybody have any reflections or thoughts about what I said? Do you think I'm crazy? Do you kind of agree? Any other ideas anybody wants to say about student learning instruction or student-led instruction? Yes, Susan, go ahead.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Has it always been successful for you? Because as you were talking, I was thinking back to many years ago when I taught art history. I wanted them to. I was teaching a non-Western class, and I wanted them to all prepare a little. Actually, I was thinking podcasts or a little. At the time, they didn't know the technology to do it, but some sort of little presentation that they would present to the class as part of the. Instead of writing a paper, they would do a presentation. And I got really mixed results on it in terms of the quality, in terms of the content, in terms of, and my goal was to have a database of these. This was way before, online learning, but to have this little database of student presentations that I could then share the next semester I taught the course. So when we talked about Chinese, whatever, I would pull out this little thing and say, oh, this is what a student last year discovered about it. It was not quite as successful as I wanted it to be. So do you have any examples of where it hasn't been successful?
Sure.
And
like
I mean, I wound up not teaching that course again, so I never got to, as you say, reflect on it and change it.
Well, the problem is that not everybody wants to meet with me beforehand. So some of my students didn't want to meet with me beforehand. And when they asked some questions and things, I mean, it is an ESL grammar and writing class, you understand? So I want them to use correct grammar in their presentation and in their questions and in other things they're doing. And they're supposed to meet with me, but some didn't, so I had 2 students who didn't. And I mentioned to them afterwards, that's why you needed to meet with me beforehand. But they didn't prepare as well. I'm going to
Do
say
you have a
everybody.
rubric that you use when you do this to help evaluate them and to at least give them some sort of structure to follow? Like, I need to cover this and I need to make sure the grammar is this.
I did have a general rubric, but yeah, I mean, the thing is that some people are busier than others. Some didn't want to meet. They couldn't meet. They said for different reasons. I mean, I tried to schedule appointments with them and say, hey, let's meet. I need to meet with you. And then they didn't respond. And so, yeah, I have a rubric, but I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes correcting grammar, what I find with ESL students, how to ask a question is very difficult. Why did I do this? I didn't want simple types of questions. I wanted thought-provoking questions that they could ask each other. Not like, did you eat a turkey sandwich? You understand? Not that kind of just a simple yes, no question. How do we ask those more difficult questions is not easy in another language. So, if I went back to sharing some of these questions that these students came up with, this is what she wrote. What does it mean to be impeccable with your word? So in the 4 agreements, one of the first concept is to be impeccable with your word. What does that really mean? And how can we be impeccable with our words? How do words create reality? This is an interesting kind of question. It's not a yes, no question. What negative words do people use against themselves? What does it mean to take something personally? How do I apply the, some of them are more factual, why are they, but these are what the students made. And those who sat down with me and went through them, we tried to create more thought-provoking questions. I think we have to look at what our students need in our class and what we teach. And my class is ESL. There's a certain need that ESL students have, especially as an ESL instructor, where I'm going to try to teach them some things that are going to help them with other classes. So I think starting with the outcomes is the big thing. Things are not perfect, Susan. They're not perfect. You understand? I mean, I'll be honest with you. Some of the presentations were stronger than others, right?
Okay, I was just curious because, same thing with my example of that. Some were really fabulous and some were just, barely there.
Oh, I
So,
didn't have anybody who was barely there. So I had a very good class. Like I said, this was an amazing class. There were only 8 students in the class, and they chose really good books, and they all did a great job with it. I think that what worked the best was I chose the 2 strongest students to go first, and their presentations were awesome. I mean, this guy who talked about Carnegie's book, I tried to connect him with the organization and to become a speaker for them. I said, man, you're ready to be like a professional speaker. They have organizations working with them already right now, and he's thought about it, but he's a young man. He's not sure if that's where he wants to go. I think a good examples at the beginning sets the tone. So that was what I did with this, is I set the tone with the first 2 were really strong and they worked with me well. And so some of the other ones in the middle, they didn't work as well, but they still did a good job and they had things prepared and ready. And the other students read their material and were ready as well. Anybody else want to say something about student-led instruction? We only have 2 minutes left, but anybody, anything pressing? I'm going to encourage you to think about your objectives, how your students can lead the class into meeting them, and what they can do to take ownership of their learning. Empower your students. It also gives us an opportunity to get to know them, to know who they are, to see what their interests are. And through that, I think we're serving equity. We're creating stronger classes, a more memorable learning experience. And also, it's giving our students the ability to become leaders. We want our students to be leaders and to do other things. Somebody mentioned group work at the beginning, teamwork. It was good to hear your concepts of teamwork, Al. And Robert, I think teamwork is important. I find that teamwork doesn't always work that good for our classes when they need to meet outside of class, and I say you need to make a group and work on it as a group. I kind of like an individual assignments in some ways. I have seen mixed results with group work. When I have my students do group work, it seems like sometimes some take a leadership more than others. I think individual work is also beneficial, that there's a good way to kind of mix them if we can, and to give our students both some group work, teamwork, and individual assignments as well. Thank you for attending. I hope this helped you in some ways. And I think we're supposed to end at 10:45, right? So you got 15 minutes for coffee or anything else. I'll stay here a little bit longer if anybody has a question or you want to talk with me for a minute more. But enjoy the other things that we have today. And thank you for attending this short workshop.
Thank you. When is the next workshop? I'm
I
in
think
New
it's
York,
11
so I'm on like a,
o'clock. So it's 2 o'clock your time.
right, but it's at 11. Okay, because I'm looking at the
Right. So you go
schedule.
back to the lobby, and then when
Yeah.
you're back in the lobby, you see the next groups. If I'm correct, I think they
Yes.
were at 11 o'clock,
Yes.
and then they're like another 45 minutes. I think there's a break, and then we go and do some more.
Okay, it does list my time zone.
Oh, okay.
So this was supposed to be 1 to 2, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, 1 to 1:45. I mean, it's they give a
Okay,
you
now
know.
they're popping up. It says 2:15, so it's a half-hour break.
Oh,
I
I was
don't know.
supposed to go all the way till 2. Did I go too
I'm
short?
very confused about this
Yes.
whole conference.
I thought it was 45 minutes. That's what I thought they gave me.
It says 1 to 2 on the thing, and then it says 2:15 to 3:15 is breakout 2.
Susan,
Sorry.
there's
15-minute
several
break.
different sessions that you can join. You can choose. They have different times, but
No, I saw that, but I just think it's very confusing, this
it is. Yes.
lobby, like this morning.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's a
I-
different
yeah.
way to use Zoom. We go back to a lobby where we see like all the different things, and then you enter into one. In one way, it's kind of an interesting way because we're used to using Zoom like for one class, right? Where you just log in. So this takes us to multiple rooms. I think you could call them rooms. I mean,
Well, I
Yeah.
think
multiple
this
meetings.
it may be because it's a conference that they're using the conference. You pay different rates. The college pays
Correct.
different rates for that. But what just popped up on my lobby is a session at 2:15 to 3:15, aligning outcomes with assignments.
Well,
So
then,
I
hey,
guess
if you guys want to discuss anything more, I mean, I'm open to. I'll be honest with you. I heard some great ideas from you guys. I've got 3 pages of notes here. The reason I did this wasn't just for me to lead, it was also for you guys to share and give your thoughts on what can be
Mhm.
done. And I think that anytime we have a conference like this with people from so many places around the US coming together, that there are a lot of good ideas out there. So if people want to share any concepts you have, any thoughts or any hopes, Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to address the issue of, since you're a teacher of ESL, where there are going to be a variety of levels of linguistic achievement,
Mhm.
in asking students who are less confident in their language, and I teach people like that, of course, in my program too.
So do I.
How do you, encourage them to feel comfortable enough to not embarrass themselves? Sort of, that is kind of where we're headed, to do a presentation, and not have the students whose language abilities are at the highest, leading everything and leaving the others behind, to the wayside. Do you encounter that reticence issue?
Well, I think it might be a little bit different in an ESL class when all the students are ESL students and they support each other and they recognize people have a need.
Mhm. Good point. Yeah.
So that might be a little bit different. I mean, I was talking with one of my students who's in graduate school at UCLA, and he's really smart. His English is really good. But when he's in class, he says, in graduate level, there's a lot of discussion, and he'll present his concept. But when there's the discussion of what other people say, he doesn't say much.
Mhm.
And he feels frustrated. He almost told me he wanted to quit. And this guy's on a full ride. You understand? He's a very intelligent. He's doing great. He's his English is good. I mean, really good. Really good. You're really good. You understand? I mean, he's at a master's level. And so, how do we deal with this lack of confidence? The research shows in ESL, one of the biggest lack of confidence comes from pronunciation issues. How do
Mm.
people say or pronounce words? I believe students need direct instruction with pronunciation. They need some work with pronunciation. So, in good ESL programs, there should be ESL pronunciation instruction, practice, awareness of phonemes and all those kinds of things. Now, that does not mean someone's going to have perfect pronunciation, but the more people work on pronunciation, the stronger their pronunciation gets. And then, I'm sorry, then they have more confidence. There seems to be a relationship to this. So confidence is a big issue for ESL students.
Yeah,
And
I get that. They don't always, and you talk a lot about how to ask the right question. I find my English language learners don't ask questions.
right.
I think
So
because they're afraid
it's
of how to
extremely
ask it.
difficult. Most of the ESL books don't really teach that. So I go through, you know what? I use the instructional materials that I get, like how to teach multiple intelligences, and they have concepts on how to ask different thought-provoking questions. And I give my students the models, and I ask them the same things they give us in like teacher training. I think that I ask them to get to these higher cognitive level questions. This is what they can look like. How can you make them? It's not easy. I'm going to be honest
Mhm.
with you. Now, I do teach an advanced level ESL class, so I do not have students at a lower level in this class. But I do teach lower level as well. But in this class, this was a more advanced. This is an
Mhm.
advanced level. So I do want to start with that caveat. But I do think that students do need to have a lot of practice with discussion, and also like not just discussion of like what's your favorite food and something, because sometimes in our ESL classes it's more like life skills. But how do they get them to really talk about what they want to learn and do?
Mhm.
Practice makes perfect too. So giving students a chance to practice, that is really good. You understand? If you have a lot of non-native speakers, what could you do? This is what I do. I write short speeches and presentations with the words and everything in a PowerPoint presentation. I record myself with PowerPoint as a video, and I ask my students to record themselves saying the same presentation to practice making presentations in English when I teach pronunciation. Is that clear? Now, you guys could do that too. Okay, if you're teaching baking, you could make a PowerPoint of how to bake one kind of thing with a little video of yourself with the text and words, speaking slowly and clearly. That's what I tell my students. Try to speak slowly and clearly. They listen to you, they practice. The more they practice, guess what? The research shows that they do improve some. Now, I don't think practice is the only thing students should do, but I do think that can benefit
Mhm.
ESL students, especially the spoken aspect. My chair and I are two different camps. My chair thinks the core of our ESL program is writing and grammar. I'm the opposite. I think the core is listening and speaking. You
Mhm.
understand
Well,
that it's actually harder for them. So how do you build that? I'll just give you some thoughts that I've done, which is recorded presentations and give them a chance to practice if you have a lot.
mhm. But I have students, so I record all of my, I've been on Zoom for the last year.
Yeah.
So I record everything, and I also record my demos. Like I teach art, so, and actually I'm going to continue that past post pandemic because I think, it's like baking. When you do something complicated, students are not always paying attention. Their mind's somewhere else. They're looking at the person next to them. They totally. So this way, if they could watch it over and over again if they want. If they want to learn how to paint something, they could watch it 10 times. I find my ELL students are not that comfortable asking in class. Now, maybe they are more comfortable with the writing aspect because I'll say, do you have questions? And I'll do it in numerous different ways. And sometimes I go around the whole room and say, everyone has to ask me one question. And the ESL student does not answer. And then, I had one last semester where I got one time 47 emails, asking the same question over and over again. So I wonder if it was a more comfortable thing writing it and asking me, where in class there is that confidence at level, right, where I'm not confident in my language skills. Or cultural. I mean, you didn't address the cultural aspect of it either in ELL, where you have students who who might have been taught you don't ask the professor a question because the professor is the knowledgeable one.
I understand. I think modeling though works good too. So I have one of my students is a professional artist. He's done, different things around the world, and he's taking some of the art classes at the community college as well for fun. But he's a really good artist already. And I ask him, "Do you talk much in the class?" And he goes, "No." And so, how could you model? I think many classes now do not have ESL requirements. We should, if you know that you're accepting students at many language abilities, maybe you should have some model type of questions demonstrating how students can ask a good question about art of what you're teaching. How could they formulate a question? It's not that easy. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not that easy to make a question, and to make a question where they want to ask more. Some people don't mind having incorrect grammar. So I have one friend, I mean, he doesn't care if his grammar is wrong and he asks anyway. And other people are they're very self-conscious. They don't want to be making a mistake. But I tell a lot of my students this, and we should, guys, let's be honest. Hey, Schwarzenegger was the governor. Did he always speak in correct English? Did he always use correct pronunciation? No, he was still successful. Okay, one of my cousins used to work with this Italian who had a TV show on cooking and everything. You understand? I mean, pronunciation's not that good, grammar's not that good, but he's got a TV show and people love it. People love it. Who we are, our mistakes, guys, none of us are perfect, right? I think for English language learners, there's this concept of perfection. I mean, I've actually had students who come into my class and say, "I want to have perfect English." I laugh at them and I say, "I don't have perfect English. Who has perfect English? Is that a realistic expectation? What should students say?" Now, wait, hold on. I'm not saying, I don't want to lower my students' abilities. I don't want to say that they can't do something, but what are their goals? If they want to be perfect, it's so hard. You understand? What do we want? Our students want to have clear communication that other people understand them. I'm sorry for an English language teacher, you understand. Clear community. As people understand you and the grammar's not perfect, that's okay, right? And how can students get comfortable with being who they are and making a few mistakes? I mean, let's be honest, guys. You can look at many examples of people who are highly successful without having perfect English. And I give it to my students again and again and again and again to make them not have that expectation. I'm sorry, that's my thought as an ESL teacher. Is that clear? But guys, thank you so much. I think we're about ready. So you guys take care. I'll see you again. Hopefully, it's great to get to know some of you guys, and take care.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You got it.
Thank you.